Okay, in your packets, chapter 3, you'll see page 15, day 10. All right, solving radical equations. Now, if we think about how we annotate, which we talked about the class before last, we think about radical, what did we write down? We said that means it's going to have a square root. An equation has an equal sign. All right? So these are equations with square roots in them. They're called radical equations. All right? So, steps to solve a radical equation. And we talked about solving means to get an answer. We're getting an answer of this equation. All right? So, first thing, isolate the radical. So, isolate. If you're isolated, you're all alone. So, isolate. The word isolate means to get all alone. Get all by itself, the radical. So it's alone. All right, so let's take a look at this first example. What we mean by isolate the radical is on one side of the equal sign, we want only the radical. And as you can see, only the radical's on the side. So life is good. Step 2, square both sides of the equation. This should get rid of the radical. So I'm going to square both sides of the equation. Okay? Well, we said before that the square root of anything squared, right? Square root of x times the square root of x is whatever it is underneath the radical sign. So let's take a look. So the square root of x times the square root of x is just x. Some people might say, well, it's the square root of x squared, which is just x. So when you square a radical, whatever's underneath it is what you get. 7 squared is 49. All right? So I square both sides, solve the resulting equation. This is solved. Now I need to check my solution. Okay, so I'm going to do a check. So we haven't done a lot of checks this year. You definitely always have to check when you do square root equations. So to check, I start with the original, but instead of x, I put the number of my solution. And now I work on the one side. The square root of 49 I know is 7. And I ask myself, does that equal the thing on the other side? It checks. After I've made my check, I will circle my answer. Okay? Here we go. Number 2, isolate the radical. It's not isolated yet. This 6 is here in front. So 6 is being multiplied. So what am I going to do? I'm going to divide by 6. Because if I isolate the radical, it makes my life easier. So I divide by 6. So the square root of y equals 48 divided by 6 is 8. Step 2, square both sides. So I'm going to take this, square it, take this, square it. The square root of anything squared is the anything. 8 squared is 64. Now that looks like an answer, but I'm going to check it by writing the original again. So here's my check. The original, 6 square root 64 equals 8. Square root of 64, or I missed 48, sorry. Square root of 64 is 8, so 6 times 8, 48. What's 6 times 8? 6 times 8 is also 48. 48 equals 48. It checks. I can now circle my answer. If it did not check, you're going to want to check again. Maybe you did something wrong. And if it absolutely doesn't check, then you would reject your answer, just like we had to reject before. All right, so now, a little bit harder. Step 1, isolate the radical. It is isolated because everything that you can see is under the radical sign. So this is isolated. Step 2, square both sides. Okay. The square root of anything squared is the anything. 4 squared is 16. Okay. Now let's see what step 3 said again. Step 3, solve the resulting equation. All right, well, I've got something here to solve now. So I just solve it like I normally do. Add 1, add 1. So 2x equals 17. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X equals 17 halves. I know what you're thinking. It's not going to work out perfectly. Okay, but it is what it is. It's a fraction. I almost started to box it in, but I forgot we have to check our answer first. So let's check. I'm going to put a line here. Whoops. Not where I wanted to put it. I'm going to put a line here so I can check. So here's my check. So I have the square root of, and I'm going to check it out. So let's check with this. So square root of 2 times 17 over 2 minus 1. And I want to know, does that equal 4? Well, 2 times 17 divided by 2, the 2's reduce, leaving me 17. Minus 1. Does that equal 4? I don't know. Let's keep going. 17 minus 1 is 16. Square root of 16 is 4. 4 equals 4. It's a check. So now I can circle my answer. Next one over here. This is not isolated. So let's get the 6 over. I'm going to subtract the 6. I get negative square root y equals 2 take away 6 is negative 4. I'm going to divide by negative 1. Makes that positive. The square root of y equals 4. Okay, we're isolated. Step 2, square both sides. Okay. Both sides are squared. Square root of anything squared is the anything. 4 squared is 16. Let's check our answer. 6 minus the square root of 16 equals 2. 6 minus the square root of 16 is 4. 6 minus 4 is 2. 2 equals 2. That's a check. That's a good answer. I know what you're thinking. Do they all check? Not all of them. So we always have to do the check. Okay? Let's take a look at the next one. Number 5. We have radicals on both sides, but that's okay. They are isolated. So let's just square both sides. The square root of anything squared is the anything. Okay. Now solve what's left. 6x is smaller, so I'm going to take away 6x. So I have 3 equals 2x minus 7. Add 7. Add 7. 3 plus 7 is 10. And this is 2x. Divide by 2. Divide by 2. X equals 5. Can't box it in until I check it. Okay? I need some room for a check. Let's see. Well, I got some room right below it. Let me check it. So radical, here's my check. And I'll move it up in a second. So I got square root of 6x plus 3. So this is going to be the square root of 6 times 5 plus 3. And I want to know if that equals the square root of 8x minus 7. The square root of 8 times 5 minus 7. Well, 6 times 5 is 30 plus 3 is 33. I don't know what the square root of 33 is, so I'm just going to leave it. 8 times 5 is 40 minus 7. That's 33. Square root of 33, does that equal the square root of 33? Yep, that checks. So therefore, circle your answer. That's a good answer. Last one for right now. Square root is isolated. Doesn't matter what side of the equal sign it's on as long as it's isolated. Square both sides. Okay? Well, x squared, that's x squared. Square root of anything squared is the anything. Okay. If you notice now, this problem had x to the first power everywhere. This one has x squared. And if you remember from earlier in the year, we called it a quadratic. And when we have a quadratic, we don't solve it by getting x's on one side and numbers on the other. We get it equal to 0. So back in like chapter 1, day, I don't know, 5 or 6 or so, I think it was chapter 1, solving quadratics by factoring. Okay, we got to bring this over. So take away x, take away 2. Take away x, take away 2. These are not like terms, so I'm just going to write all 3 terms. Okay? Now I have to try to factor this. So I want factors of 2 with a difference of 1. That's 2 and 1. So x and x, 2 and 1. I need a negative 2 after I combine them, or a negative 1 after I combine them. So I need a negative on the 2 and a positive on the 1. Then I make my t and set each equal to 0. So don't forget, it still has to stay equal to 0. It's an equation. We're solving for something. So here, x equals 2 and x equals negative 1. I'm not going to box them in until I do my check. So here's a check. And here's a check. I'm going to check each one separately. So I'm going to try the 2. I put a 2 in for x. So 2 equals square root of 2 plus 2. So 2 equals square root of 2 plus 2. 2 equals square root of, what's 2 plus 2? That's 4. Square root of 4 I know is 2. That checks. I'm going to circle it. Now I got to try this one. Put a negative 1 in. Negative 1 equals the square root of negative 1 plus 2. Negative 1 equals the square root of negative 1 plus 2. Negative 1 equals the square root of, well, a negative 1 add 2 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. Does negative 1 equal 1? No. No. So we will write reject next to this answer. We don't cross it off, we don't scribble it out, we don't erase it. We write the word reject there, and that gets you another point when you take the test. Okay? So our solution is only 2, not also the negative 1. And that is solving square root equations.